All right, I'm going to be making some Snickerdoodles today because it is one of my husband's favorite cookies and he does not consider it to be Christmas unless there are Snickerdoodles. So I'm just softening a stick of butter. I am making the recipe from The Joy of Cooking, by the way, amazing cookbook, and I'm doing a half recipe since it is just me and my husband and we're going to be eating all of these cookies ourselves. And I want to have a variety of Christmas treats in the house, so I do not want a bunch of Snickerdoodles. So anyway, this is just a stick of butter that I microwaved on very low for a couple minutes just to soften it. The original recipe calls for 1.5 cups of sugar, so half of that is 3/4 of a cup of sugar. So Snickerdoodles, it's a cookie that just kind of, I never really thought to make them when I was younger. I think I had them once at a potluck or something, and I guess maybe they were bad Snickerdoodles. I didn't like them. I thought they were gross, so I never bothered making them again. But then my husband, when we were, seeing each other at the beginning, he really liked Snickerdoodles and wanted them, and I thought, okay, well, I'll just make them for him and then I won't have any. But I made them, and I was delighted to find that they are a nice, crisp, also fluffy cookie with a really good buttery flavor and a nice cinnamon touch in there as well. And so now I really like Snickerdoodles as well, and they are a very easy cookie to make. I think these are very approachable for beginner level bakers. So, you can get out a stand mixer or an electric mixer and cream these together, but I don't bother. I just smush them together with this sturdy spatula like this until they're well combined. And then, I'll beat them a little bit. I'm always hesitant to get too aggressive in the kitchen when I'm filming anything because I'm worried I'll knock over my tripod. But if you don't happen to have a tripod next to you while you're making these, you can go to town. Be super aggressive when you cream the sugar and butter together. But again, I don't really bother creaming them. And they always turn out just fine. All right, there is our butter and sugar. Now, I learned this trick recently on the Great British Bake Off, actually, but if you want to prevent your mixture from curdling, I'm about to add an egg, by the way, and when you add an egg to a butter-sugar mixture, it often can curdle. It gets that grainy, separated look to it, so I'm just adding in a little bit of flour to prevent that from happening. I never really knew that that's what it was before, that it was curdling. When I saw that little grainy texture when I'd mix things together, I thought it was just kind of normal. And I guess it is kind of normal, but if you want it to be smooth and not curdled, add a little flour to stabilize it. Okay, now beat in 1 egg. Again, the original recipe was 2 eggs, so it's really easy to just reduce it to 1 egg. Again, you don't really have to whip out a stand mixer and fluff this or anything. I don't think you do anyway. That was my oven beeping to let me know that it is now preheated at 350 degrees. Good idea to do that. Another reason why I love this cookie recipe is it does not involve chilling your dough or anything. Like, it comes together very quickly, start to finish. You can be thinking to yourself, gee, I want some Snickerdoodles. And literally, like, 15 minutes later, you will have Snickerdoodles. Assuming that you already have all the ingredients, which, if you're a cook or a baker, you probably do have all these ingredients. They're very common ingredients to have in fridges and pantries. Okay, that's all combined and not curdled. Now I'm going to start adding the dry ingredients. If you have followed me for a while, you know that when I bake, I like to avoid making as many dirty bowls as possible. So rather than mixing the dry ingredients in a separate bowl and then sifting them in like you're supposed to do, I just do it on top and mix it on top. And that way I have 1 less dirty bowl to clean. So the original recipe called for 2 3/4 cups of flour. So half of that is 1 3/8. So that's 1 1/4 and 1/2 cup of flour. Remembering that I put like 1/2 tablespoon of flour in earlier. All right, there's our flour. Now here's something that's a little unique about this recipe, at least unique to modern cooks. Instead of adding baking powder, we're going to add baking soda and cream of tartar. And these two things together is baking powder, essentially. I don't know what the ratio is in baking powder, but we're gonna do a 2-to-1 ratio here with cream of tartar and baking soda. 1/2 teaspoon of baking soda and a whole teaspoon of cream of tartar. 1/2 teaspoon of baking soda and 2 1/2 teaspoons because my whole teaspoon won't fit in the whole of cream of tartar. So cream of tartar is an acid, and it reacts with the baking soda, which is a base, and that is what will make these cookies fluffy. And that's why, in my view, it's not really imperative that you beat the sugar or the eggs or anything, because you get the rise from the chemicals rather than the butter and the egg. All right, and we also want 1/4 teaspoon of salt, so that's about 1/4 teaspoon of salt. And then what I like to do is I just sort of mix the dry things on top of each other a little bit first, and then I incorporate them into the wet. Like I said, this recipe is pretty easy for beginner level bakers. Really, you only have to watch out for a couple things. One, do not overmix the dough. Mix it until it comes together and it's smooth, but don't mix it like beyond that point, because then they'll get tough. The other thing you need to be careful of is to not bake them too long. I think most home cooks and home bakers, the main mistake they make with cookies is they cook them too long. Your cookies will continue to cook a little tiny bit after you pull them from the oven, because the cookie sheet is still hot and they still have heat inside of them that will continue to cook them a little bit. And I think a lot of home bakers are scared of undercooking and underbaking things because they're scared of like food safety and all that stuff. And sure, that's important, I guess, but I don't know, I eat raw cookie dough. I think it's, personally, I think it's more tragic to overbake cookies than to underbake them. Although something like a Snickerdoodle, it's supposed to be nice and crisp. You don't want it to be like soft necessarily and chewy like a chocolate chip cookie. Okay, so it's starting to come together. It kind of is like a shortbread cookie dough in texture. The main difference really is that this has, well, it has an egg and it also has leavening. Okay, so it's basically come together. It's not like a solid stiff piece of dough yet, but it is together. Like I said, you do not have to chill this dough. You don't have to roll it out. We're going to roll it into balls with our clean hands, and that is how we're going to shape the cookies. So I have a cookie sheet with a stained silpat on it. It is not dirty. It is stained from many, many years of use. And I'm going to make the little mixture we're going to dip our balls in to give them flavor and great shine and texture. This is just 2 tablespoons of regular old granulated sugar, to which I'm going to add 2 teaspoons of cinnamon. Now this is where I'm going to get kind of fancy. We live not in Seattle, but kind of near Seattle, and there's a store called, if my camera will focus, World Spice Merchants, and we got this really good, wow, my camera is not focusing. Come on, you can do it. I don't want to have to buy a new camera. Anyway, this is a Vietnamese cinnamon, and it has a really nice, subtle flavor to it. It tastes like cinnamon, but it tastes like really, really good cinnamon, and I've been using it very sparingly because it's expensive and it was special. I'm probably just going to use the rest of this jar in these Snickerdoodles. I like to use it whenever I'm making something that's very cinnamon forward. Yeah, it looks like I'm just going to empty the bottle. The end of an era! It's okay, I bought this like, I don't know, 2 or 3 years ago. And you just mix them together, and that's basically cinnamon sugar. And there will be some left over after I'm done making these cookies, and I save that cinnamon sugar, especially since this cinnamon is expensive and special, and I put it in cocoa. You can do a few other things with it. I mostly just either put it in cocoa or I make cinnamon toast. I'll just like make toast and I'll butter it, and then I'll sprinkle this on afterwards, and it's delicious. Okay, so to form the cookies, I have my handy dandy cookie scoop or ice cream scoop. I think this is technically a sorbet scoop. I use it for cookies. And I just scoop. This is why I didn't really care if the dough cohesively came into one solid mass. I scoop out a bit, pop it out into my hand, and then I roll it, just like I did in my Buckeye video recently, until you have a nice ball. And then you dip that in the cinnamon sugar solution. And just like that, as a ball, you just put it on the sheet. And you want to space these cookies a couple inches apart because as they bake, they're going to spread out. And that's what's going to give them their shape. But yeah, that's all you have to do. You just have to scoop them out. It's nice to use this ice cream or sorbet or whatever it is scoop, because it really helps in cases like this if your cookies are all exactly the same size, because then they will all bake at the same rate. And you won't have some cookies that are more done than others. And yeah, again, I think this is a pretty easy and approachable recipe for beginners. And I think kids would have a lot of fun rolling the dough into balls. You know, if you're an adult and you want to make these with a kid, you can scoop out the bits of dough into the sizes that they need to be and let the kids roll them into balls and dip them in the cinnamon sugar. Okay, I've got a dozen of these on the cookie sheet ready to bake, and I still have probably enough dough for another half dozen. So even this reduced recipe makes 18 cookies, which I think is plenty for a 1 to 2 person household, but your results will vary. Okay, while that first batch is still in the oven, they need to bake, by the way, for, it says 12 to 15 minutes on the recipe, but I always do 10 minutes first and check just to make sure. Anyway, I rolled out the rest of the cookies onto another cookie sheet with some parchment paper. This is what you can use if you don't have a silpat. You could also just grease the cookie sheet according to the recipe. I just like using parchment or a silpat because it's easier and cleaner. And I got 8 more. So this half recipe for me today made 20. Your mileage may vary. And I also have a little bit of leftover cinnamon sugar, probably like a tablespoon and a half of cinnamon sugar left over. This will not go to waste. I will put it in cocoa. The cookies are not done yet, but I just want to show you what they look like after 10 minutes in the oven. If you touch them very carefully and gently, they are very, very goopy in the center, but you can see, hopefully, that they're starting to sort of crack a little bit and they're spreading themselves out. So they're getting there, but they're still a bit goopy in the center. So I'm giving them another 2 minutes. Okay, I just took these out of the oven probably about 30 seconds ago, and they are a little bit soft to the touch here, but not goopy. And you want to let them sit on this nice hot cookie sheet for a couple minutes. That will help them continue to firm up properly. And then I'm going to remove them and put them onto a wire rack. And meanwhile, I have the other cookies in the oven. All right, this is the second batch. It's been out of the oven and it's been sitting for a minute or two. And I just wanted to illustrate what I mean by letting them sit for a minute or two to set up, because that sounds a little ambiguous. When these first came out of the oven, I could not do this. But now I can do this. I can just pick them up with my bare hand and they don't squish and fall apart as I try to pick them up. So that's as long as you need to let them sit on the cookie sheet. Then you can transfer them with your bare hands. These cookies are best when they are relatively fresh out of the oven. I don't know how well you can see this, but they have a nice, light, fluffy texture on the inside, but they are also crisp. Anyway, that is Snickerdoodles. Again, they are a very approachable cookie, I'd say, for beginner level bakers. And they do have such a lovely cinnamon flavor, especially this particular bougie cinnamon. It's okay, you can use regular cinnamon if you want. They are a huge part of my husband's Christmas, and now they are a huge part of my Christmas, and I hope that they become a huge part of your Christmas too. Bye.